It started with a vibration, not a quake, not anything violent, just a slow, persistent tremor beneath the floorboards. Richard and Helen Warner noticed it on a Wednesday evening as they sat watching the news in their countryside home just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The kind of place where silence at night was so complete you could hear your own breath shift. Helen paused the television and glanced at the hardwood floors. "Did you feel that?" she asked, her voice low and careful. Richard nodded slowly, like a low hum, maybe a generator. But they had no generator, and they lived too far out for the neighbors' machinery to reach them. The vibration stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only their racing thoughts and the faint ticking of the wall clock behind. Richard brushed it off, muttering something about ground settling, but Helen wasn't convinced. That night, sleep came in fragments. Every creak of the house sounded exaggerated, elongated, as if the structure itself were breathing. And underneath it all, the sense that something was listening. Helen dreamt of earth shifting beneath their bed, of soil crawling up through the slats and covering their feet. She woke in a sweat, gasping, her ears straining in the dark, and she heard it again, a faint shuffle, then silence. The next morning, Helen called the pest control company. Their dog, Marley, had spent the entire night growling at the floor. It wasn't like him. He was old, barely barked anymore, but now he was fixated on a specific section of the living room floor, snarling as if something moved underneath. The technician arrived by noon. His name was Joel, a heavy-set man with the casual confidence of someone who'd seen it all. But after 10 minutes in the crawl space, that confidence was gone. He emerged pale, sweat clinging to his forehead. "There's something weird down there," he said, voice hoarse. "Not rats, not termites. I saw tunnels, like freshly dug, but there's no sign of collapse, and something moved, fast, too fast." Richard squinted, like an animal. Joel shook his head slowly. "I don't know what it was, but I'm not going back in there. Not without backup. Not even for double pay." Helen tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. She looked down at Marley, who was still stiff, alert, his ears pressed back. She thought she heard a distant scratching again, or maybe it was her imagination. Either way, she made Richard promise to cover the vents. That night they heard it again, a rhythmic scratching under the house. Then something new. Whispers, low, unintelligible, and coming from directly beneath their bedroom. Helen clutched Richard's arm, face frozen in shock. They leaned over the edge of the bed, holding their breath. The whispering stopped. Richard grabbed a flashlight and went outside. He was a practical man, not prone to superstition, but when he crouched beside the crawlspace vent and shined the light inside, his blood ran cold. A pair of eyes, dull, reflective, human-shaped but not quite human, stared back for a split second before vanishing into the dark. He stumbled back, breath shallow. "Something's living under our house," Helen whispered. "We need to leave." But they didn't, not yet. Because the next morning, there was a knock at the door, and the man who stood there knew things he shouldn't have known. He was middle-aged, in dusty clothes and wearing a utility backpack, introduced himself only as Gage, said he was a geologist who used to work for a private research company that surveyed the region decades ago. "I saw your report on the tunnels," he explained. "They were supposed to be sealed years ago, but I think something got through." Gage pulled out a worn, yellowed map with red markings, places surrounding the area, mostly abandoned homes and plots of land that had mysteriously gone quiet over the years. "I don't want to scare you," Gage said, "but if the tunnels beneath your house reopened, you're in serious danger, not just from structural collapse, from them." He didn't clarify what them meant, but when they invited him inside and showed him the vent, his face turned grim. "We need to go. Now. They're awake." Helen stared at the map, noticing her own property marked with a thick red X. "Why us?" she asked. "Because you're sitting on one of the old entry points, the deepest one." They packed quickly, but as they were about to step outside, the power cut, then the phone signal vanished. Gage cursed under his breath and pulled out a flare gun. Marley growled again, this time not toward the floor, but toward the hallway. The hardwood boards were warping. A bulge formed in the center, like something was pushing from below. It cracked with a sharp snap. Dust poured from the ceiling above. Helen screamed. Richard grabbed a chair and swung it at the swelling floor. It burst open. A hand emerged. Elongated fingers, grey skin, no nails, and covered in something like ash. Then another hand, then a face, not a mask. A thing, eyeless, with gills along its neck, and a split mouth that clicked open in 4 directions. Gage fired the flare into its chest. It recoiled, shrieking, a sound like hundreds of whispers all speaking at once. He shouted, "They hate light!" Another one burst from the hallway vent. Then another, crawling out from the fireplace. The house was no longer safe. They ran down the dirt road in the dark, using the flare's fading light to guide them. Behind them, the Warner house groaned and cracked as more of them broke through. From every crawl space, vent, and crevice. The house was infested. They reached Gage's truck parked a mile out. As they drove, he explained, "They aren't aliens. They're from here, from beneath. We found their burrows in the 80s. Government sealed them. We thought that was the end. But they don't die. They hibernate. And now, somehow, they're multiplying." Helen was trembling, her voice barely a whisper. "Why our house?" "Because your foundation cracked. You gave them an opening." Gage handed Richard a satellite phone. "Call this number. Tell them we've got a live breach." He looked at them with pity. They've been waiting for a long time, and now they're hungry. By dawn, helicopters hovered overhead. Suited men with flamethrowers and sonic equipment swept through the house and surrounding woods. Neighbors were told it was a gas leak. The house was condemned. Richard and Helen were relocated to an undisclosed site. They weren't allowed to tell anyone what happened. Marley was taken into quarantine. Gage disappeared. Weeks later, Helen looked up one of the locations Gage had marked on the map. An old school in Nevada. It had burned down in 1992. Cause unknown. No survivors. She closed her laptop slowly, whispering to herself, "They're still down there." She didn't tell Richard what she also saw. A blog post dated 2 days ago from a nearby town about strange noises beneath a church. The map was lighting up again. It began on a Tuesday morning, silent, grey, unassuming. Harold Grant, a 52-year-old mechanic, was finishing his coffee while staring blankly out the kitchen window of his small home on the edge of Glen Rock, Wyoming. The fog had rolled in overnight, thick and unnatural, refusing to lift with the sun. It clung to the streets like wet cotton, swallowing the edges of the houses and making the world outside seem altered. His wife, Janine, laughed lightly about it. "Reminds me of that horror movie with the creatures in the mist." She smirked and tapped his shoulder. "Don't let it get to your head, Harold." But Harold felt it deep in his chest, that tight, pressing weight that told him something was wrong. Not just eerie wrong, profoundly, cosmically wrong. He couldn't explain it. The way the dog next door refused to bark, the absence of birdsong, the way the fog seemed to breathe, subtly pulsing at the edges of his vision like it had a rhythm of its own. And then the first call came. "Dale's gone," muttered Carol from across the street, her voice shaking. She stood barefoot in the fog, robe clutched tight, hair soaked with dew. "He went out early for his jog. He hasn't come back." Harold stepped outside, his boots crunching against the gravel. The fog swallowed the sound like it never existed. "Carol, go back inside. I'll drive down the block and check the park." He didn't know why he said it. Some instinct rooted in neighbourly concern, maybe denial. He didn't expect to see Dale running loops in the park. And he didn't. Instead, he found a lone shoe, wet, still warm, and drag marks that led straight into the dense wall of fog. He crouched, touched the ground, and stared as the mist shimmered slightly, unnaturally, in response to his movement. That night the power went out, not just in Harold's house, the entire neighbourhood, maybe the whole town. Phones stopped working, radios gave nothing but static, but within the noise, Harold swore he heard something, a pattern, a low whispering tone buried beneath the white noise. Janine clung to him, whispering that she had seen a figure at the window, a long, angular shape that retreated when she screamed. They boarded up the windows, every last one. Harold retrieved his old hunting rifle, long unused, from the basement. But what were they protecting themselves from? The fog, shadows. Every logical part of Harold's mind told him they were being paranoid. But his gut, the ancient survival instinct buried in every human being, screamed otherwise. That night, neither of them slept. At 3:42 a.m., the house across the street lit up in flames. A massive burst of orange and red, ripping through the fog like a flare through smoke. Carol's house. Harold ran outside instinctively, but the moment he crossed the threshold, he froze. Figures, tall, shifting, translucent, moved through the firelight, not walking, gliding. Their limbs weren't human. They bent in wrong ways, like joints were suggestions, not rules. He stumbled back, eyes wide, breath caught. One of the figures turned its faceless head toward him, and Harold swore it saw him, felt him. It didn't move, but he couldn't shake the pressure it left in his chest, like he had just been marked. He dragged himself back inside and locked the door. Janine was on the floor, weeping, whispering. It was watching me from the vents. By morning, a third of the town was gone. Not dead, gone. No bodies, no screams, just houses left eerily tidy, breakfast still steaming on tables, water running in bathtubs. The fog never cleared. People stopped talking to each other. Everyone hid inside their homes like children, pretending monsters couldn't find them under blankets. Harold tried to make a break for the town limits with Janine, but the roads were impassable. The mist became a wall, literal, humming like electricity. And every time they turned around, things seemed changed. A street turned the wrong direction. Their own house, with windows they didn't remember installing. like reality itself was subtly twisting. Then came the knock. Not pounding, just soft, rhythmic, polite. Janine, against Harold's protest, opened the door an inch. Her sister stood outside, but her sister had been visiting Arizona. "I drove all night," she said calmly. Too calmly. Her eyes were wrong, too wide, too still. Janine backed away. "Close it," Harold whispered. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just kept smiling. "Can I come in now?" Harold slammed the door. "That's not her." And the voice on the other side said, still smiling, "Then who am I?" One by one, people gave in, not because they wanted to, because the figures became people, familiar faces, loved ones. Some residents opened doors for husbands they buried years ago, others for children they never had. The fog whispered names at night, your name, over and over. Harold stopped sleeping. He sat in the kitchen, staring at the boarded window. Janine was gone. She opened the door one night and didn't come back. The thing that returned wasn't her. It looked like her. It smelled like her perfume. It even laughed the same way, but its eyes never blinked. He locked it in the bedroom and bolted the door. It didn't get angry. It just waited. Weeks passed, or maybe days. Time didn't mean much anymore. Harold was starving, exhausted, hallucinating. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe everything was finally clear. He climbed to the roof one final time, hoping to spot any sign of escape. But the fog was all there was. No end, no rescue, just the ever-churning sea of white and the gliding shadows inside it. He whispered to himself, "This isn't weather, it's a veil." And as the last bit of food ran out and his body gave in, Harold saw them rise. All of them, every figure from every corner, standing around his house, watching, waiting, until the boards creaked, and something opened the door below. It was a Tuesday evening when Howard Granger, a retired civil engineer in his early 60s, first noticed the odd humming sound. It was faint, almost like static bleeding through an old radio dial, but it was constant. He lived alone in the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Iowa, where neighbors were sparse and the land stretched flat for miles. That night, while watching the 9 o'clock news, the static grew louder for a few seconds before vanishing completely. The screen momentarily flickered, causing Howard to frown and mutter, "What the hell?" under his breath. It wasn't the sound alone that unnerved him, it was what followed. As he stepped outside to smoke his evening cigarette, the air felt heavier, thicker, as if the very oxygen had changed. The crickets, which normally created a familiar blanket of noise, had gone eerily silent. No rustling leaves, no distant barking, no passing cars, nothing. Just that strange hum, now gone, but still echoing somewhere deep inside his ears, like a phantom memory. The next day, Howard stopped by the local hardware store to buy a new set of batteries. His flashlight had dimmed significantly, and his emergency radio barely caught a signal anymore. He asked the store clerk, a wiry man named Pete, if anyone else had mentioned odd electrical problems. Pete gave him a strange look. "You too, huh?" he said, leaning in. "My fridge stopped humming yesterday. Thought it was dead, but then it started again. Only the milk turned black." Howard blinked. "Black? Like ink," Pete whispered. "Smelled like burnt hair. I threw the whole damn thing out." Howard left the store with a lump in his throat and a racing mind. By that evening, His landline had stopped working. His cell showed full signal but couldn't connect to anyone. Even the dog from next door, normally a loud nuisance, had gone silent. It wasn't just technology flickering out. It was life itself. On the third night, Howard woke up at 3:17 a.m. to a deep rumbling beneath his house. The floorboards vibrated slightly, just enough to wake him. He sat up, heart pounding, listening. It wasn't an earthquake. The sound was too deliberate, like machinery underground. Slow, grinding, relentless. He grabbed his flashlight and walked outside, barefoot in his robe. The field across from his house, a cornfield stretching endlessly into the dark, glowed faintly. Not the crops themselves, but the soil, as if something underneath was alive, pulsating, watching. Then came the voices. At first he thought it was wind whistling through the stalks, but the tones were too human, whispered fragments of sentences, not in English, not in any language he recognized, and they were calling his name. By morning, Howard decided to visit the Jenkins family next door. They hadn't collected their mail in 3 days, and the porch light had been blinking since Monday. He knocked once, twice, no answer. He tried the doorknob, unlocked. Inside, the house was pristine, too pristine. No dishes in the sink, no shoes by the door, not even a dog bowl. It was like they had never lived there. On the kitchen table was a single sheet of paper with 3 words scrawled in frantic handwriting. They are inside. The power flickered. The microwave beeped oddly, displaying a sequence of symbols, triangles, circles, dashes, not numbers, not time. He backed away, chest tight, vision swimming. A dark shape moved across the hallway mirror. Tall, too tall, with limbs slightly too long to be human. That night the humming returned. Louder, more violent. His walls trembled with it. He shut every window, every door, taped up the vents. He could feel them now. Not just underground, but above, behind the walls, in the attic. The air tasted of metal and decay. He tried to call for help. Emergency services, friends, even radio channels. Nothing, only static. Then came the scratching. Dozens, maybe hundreds of sharp, thin claws dragging along the outer walls like insects made of bone. Something skittered past the living room window. Tall, spindly, gliding instead of walking. Howard backed into his bedroom, gun shaking in hand. But when he looked up, he froze. In the reflection of the glass cabinet, behind him, was a figure. Faceless, its skin rippling like the surface of water. It didn't breathe. It vibrated. Howard wasn't seen again after that night. 2 weeks later, a hazmat team arrived. The entire town had gone silent. No calls in or out. No power. No satellite feed. What they found was grotesque. Houses with furniture melted into the floors. Televisions leaking black fluid. Food that moved when touched. No bodies. Not a single one. Just static. One team member, Dr. Marla Jennings, found Howard's journal under a floorboard. It was half burned, pages torn, but one sentence appeared again and again. They are not from the sky, they are from below. A year later, the government declared Cedar Falls a closed ecological anomaly. The public was told it was a toxic spill, an environmental disaster, but the satellite images were blacked out. No fly zone. Locals who lived miles away claimed they could still hear that low hum at night. Sometimes they said you could see figures at the edge of the cornfields watching. And when a boy disappeared from a nearby town, His shoes were found at the border of the restricted zone, filled with tiny holes, as if eaten through by a swarm of termites with surgical precision. The silence isn't natural anymore. It's a warning. 2 months after the Cedar Falls incident, a rogue signal was intercepted by a shortwave radio operator in Missouri. The man, an amateur radio enthusiast named Frank Lerner, managed to record it. The transmission lasted only 45 seconds and was mostly static, but there were moments of clarity, enough to chill his blood. A woman's voice, cracked, exhausted, whispering through layers of interference. If someone hears this, they dig through us. Not from space, no ships, no noise, just hunger. They learn your skin. They use your breath. They are becoming. Frank played the recording over and over. He posted it online. Within hours, his account was deleted, his device remotely wiped, and men in unmarked vehicles were seen outside his home. He disappeared the following night. Only his dog was found, alive, but staring blankly at the walls, refusing to eat. In early spring, a group of geologists were granted limited access to the Cedar Falls border under the guise of soil testing. One of them, Dr. Elaine Murray, had secretly been following the pattern of electromagnetic disturbances across the Midwest. She believed there was a connection between these and the strange hum reported by several witnesses. As they drilled samples near the cornfield perimeter, they found something beneath the topsoil. Organic tissue, not roots, not animal. It had a fleshy, membranous texture, and it was warm. When they exposed it to light, it reacted. A twitch, a slow, retracting pulse, like a wound flinching shut. Elaine froze. "It's not dead," she said. "It's waiting." The other scientists dismissed it. But 3 days later, the 2 men on her team were both found inside their tents, eyes open, mouths filled with dark soil, and tongues missing. In the nearby town of Millstone, strange things began to happen. Pets refused to go outside after sunset. Elderly residents reported sleep paralysis accompanied by tall figures at the foot of their beds. A boy woke screaming that his mother wasn't blinking right. Then came the noise. Low, soft at first. A constant hum in people's ears that no one else could hear. Those who heard it couldn't sleep. Some grew paranoid, some violent. Several were hospitalized with bleeding from their ears, claiming they could hear voices inside the hum. A local priest, Father Caldwell, began recording his sermons. During playback, beneath his voice, a strange language could be heard repeating words in a rhythmic chant. Audio experts tried to clean it up and found 3 chilling English words embedded in reverse. "We are many." In a secret government lab located under the Department of Energy's Research Division, a controversial experiment was being conducted. Using reflective light manipulation, they attempted to recreate the mirror anomalies observed in Cedar Falls homes. The result: one subject seated in front of a mirror in a sealed room was instructed to stare at his own reflection for 20 minutes under controlled lighting. At minute 16, he whispered, "That's not me anymore." Seconds later, the reflection smiled, though the man himself did not. He tried to run. The mirror shattered from the inside, shards embedded into the floor, walls, and even the observation glass. When they found him, he was curled in the corner, muttering, "They live behind the light." The mirror pieces all showed his face, frozen in different expressions. each one slightly off. 6 months after Cedar Falls was quarantined, an unauthorized signal hijacked multiple satellite frequencies across North America. It appeared for exactly 3 minutes on news broadcasts, weather updates, and even baby monitors. The footage showed what looked like an aerial view of Cedar Falls, now completely overtaken by a pulsing black mass that resembled a living hive. In the final 30 seconds, the image zoomed in on a house, Howard Granger's house. Through the window, a figure stood motionless. Not Howard. Something wearing Howard's skin, head tilting unnaturally as if studying the camera. Then, the signal cut to black. A year later, similar symptoms began appearing in other small towns. Power failures, audio distortions, people forgetting words or hallucinating family members with the wrong faces, livestock with no organs, children drawing symbols in the dirt they had never seen before. No one says Cedar Falls out loud anymore. It's a ghost town, even in memory. The government won't confirm, but the silence is proof enough. The invasion never came with ships, nor weapons. It came through roots, through soil, through frequency and silence and reflection. And now, it's spreading,